Have you ever noticed how easy it is to break a promise you've made only to yourself? Whether it's hitting the gym or getting to bed on time, relying on pure willpower can be a losing battle. But what if the secret to sticking to your goals isn't just about digging deeper? What if it's about changing the situation? You're about to hear two stories where sharing a goal made all the difference. The first is about how a struggling Oxford professor finally finished a fantasy masterpiece that became one of the most celebrated novels in history. The second is about how a frustrated homemaker turned her solution to a private struggle into a global wellness empire. Joining me to talk about why we'll do for others what we won't do for ourselves is my good friend and collaborator, University of Pennsylvania psychology professor Angela Duckworth. And she also happens to be my accountability partner. A blank page can be a terrifying thing, especially when you're a perfectionist. It's the 1930s, and an Oxford professor sits alone in his study, staring down a monumental goal he set for himself. Write an epic fantasy sequel to a children's book he'd published a few years prior. But he's his own worst enemy. Working in isolation, he spends weeks agonizing over a single paragraph, getting completely lost in the minutiae of his invented world. His latest manuscript has been gathering dust in a desk drawer for years now, and he's on the brink of abandoning the project entirely. Until he decides to drag his work out of the dark. He joins a small circle of literary peers who meet weekly in university rooms and local pubs. They call themselves the Inklings. The group has an important rule. To remain an Inkling, every week he's required to bring his raw, unfinished pages to read aloud. If he shows up without much progress, he'll be met with admonishments. If he wants to quit, the Inklings will protest, demanding that he produce another chapter. Week after week, not wanting to disappoint the room, our Oxford professor perseveres and keeps writing. That once hopeless author is none other than J.R.R. Tolkien, agonizing over a book trilogy you might have heard of, The Lord of the Rings. Oh, and the fellow Inkling he relied on the most for encouragement? His closest friend, author of the Chronicles of Narnia, C.S. Lewis. In this episode, we explore how the simple act of making your progress on a goal or intention visible to other people can change whether you abandon that goal or follow through. I'm Dr. Katy Milkman, and this is Choiceology, an original podcast from Charles Schwab. It's a show about the psychology and economics behind our decisions. We bring you true and surprising stories about high-stakes choices, and then we examine how these stories connect to the latest research in behavioral science. We do it all to help you make better judgments and avoid costly mistakes.
The slim ones. The trim ones. Who are they? They're the Metrical for Lunch Bunch. At lunchtime, instead of fattening food, they have delicious Metrical milkshake flavors to help stay slim and trim.
Turn on a TV in the early 1960s in America or flip through a magazine, and you'd be surrounded by a vision of sleek, shiny progress. Bright new homes in the suburbs. Shiny new appliances. Innovative new conveniences. It was an era where technology promised to solve every human problem, including your weight. And nowhere was that promise bigger than the grocery store, where you could simply sip your way to an ideal body.
Join the Metrical for Lunch Bunch.
This is the era of American abundance, and specifically abundance of food and calories. This is a moment when food science actually really takes off. Hi, my name is Natalia Melman Petrozella.
Natalia is a historian of American culture and the author of Fit Nation, The Gains and Pains of America's Exercise Obsession. And what Americans were obsessed with in the 1960s was abundance. They were being encouraged to consume more than ever before, while at the very same time being told they should look like they hadn't.
So you have these dual factors in this period where you have more calories that are available to people, greater abundance, wartime rationing is over, and food that is less healthful and more processed, and then a kind of judgment of enjoying it. Because if you look like you're consuming too much, well, you're a problem. And so what happens in the 1960s is you also have a growth in diet culture, which is targeted particularly towards women. Managing your weight, getting slim, taking off those pounds is emphasized or sold as your duty. And so there are diet pills, there are fad diets, there are exercise programs.
If you couldn't maintain that picture-perfect physique, the culture offered very little grace. Extra weight wasn't treated as a biological reality or the predictable byproduct of a changing food environment. It was framed as a personal failure.
One thing that's important to acknowledge is how unforgiving this diet culture was and how much a lot of women were made to believe that if they were a little too heavy, don't ask by whose standards, that it's their fault and that it is their responsibility to struggle in private.
In Queens, New York, one woman was living and struggling inside that painful culture of body shaming every day. Her name was Jean Nidetch.
She's married to a bus driver. She has 2 children. She described herself as being overweight, being married to an overweight man, having overweight children, and even a fat dog. That's how she talked about herself. She really struggled with her weight. It was not something that she was happy with. This was a struggle that she dealt with every single day, that this drama of seeing food, wanting food, eating it, not eating it, overeating it, not fitting into her dress, this was a cycle which really consumed her and a lot of other women.
Desperate to break the cycle, Jean turned to the official channels of the time, a weight loss clinic run by the New York City Department of Health.
And the advice is pretty common sense. I think it was eat fish 5 times a week, more fruits and veggies, maybe only 2 slices of bread a day. But she can't stand the delivery of this generally sound advice. For one, the nutritionist who is running the seminar is really thin. And the nutritionist was like, well, when I see a huge plate of food, I'm just disgusted at the sight of it.
Looking around the room, Jean realized she wasn't the only person struggling with dieting. The air was thick with shame. Most women were so embarrassed to be there that they sat at the back with their winter coats on. The women in that room didn't need to be told what to eat or to eat less. Most of them had heard some version of this advice before. They needed something more.
There was no check back. There was no, and I'm going to see how you did.
Everyone left that day with the same list of rules. But Jean Nidetch left with something else, an idea. A few days later, Jean picked up the phone. She invited a handful of women, who she knew were also trying to lose weight but struggling, to her small 3-bedroom apartment.
She knows that just getting some instructions is not enough. She knows that just being at home on her own in her typical environment with family who has the same eating habits that she does is not going to be the key to her success.
Jean opens the meeting by admitting to hiding Malomars, chocolate-covered marshmallowy cookies, in her bathroom. This confession allowed the other women to be equally honest.
Jean put them at ease, one, because she was a kind of voluble, friendly person. And of course, these were women that she knew. But she was also struggling with the exact same thing that they were. I cannot underestimate how much this very basic fact would have changed the dynamics of any kind of diet-related intervention during that period. It was really different to sit among peers and to look eye to eye with women who were struggling just like you than the experience of sitting there listening to a lecture from this thin expert nutritionist who's supposed to know everything and you're supposed to know nothing. I think that made a big difference.
Jean decided to keep holding gatherings in her home for friends with the shared goal of losing weight. And as more and more people joined, she ran out of places for people to sit. So neighbors would carry their own chairs down the street to her building. And as these gatherings grew, a structure began to form. For example, to kick off every meeting, members would get in line to stand on a scale.
You commit with one other person to weigh in each week. And then after that, you sit in a group all together. There's a leader. First it was Jean, then it was others who's kind of facilitating conversation. And there's both a celebration of wins, like moments of great willpower or losing weight, and then also an acknowledgement of slip-ups and a kind of encouragement to get back on track.
Word spread. And eventually, the meetings became too big to host in Jean's living room or her building's common area. So they rented a larger space above a movie theater, expecting a modest crowd. Instead, hundreds of people poured through the doors.
400 people show up. So if you can imagine that, when Jean had this idea to invite 10 people over to her living room, and now 400 people are coming over to a dedicated space to talk about their struggles with weight loss based on her model, it's pretty remarkable. People were willing to come together in semi-public about something that had been so private because it's encouraging to know that other people are in it as well. You're not alone. You're not uniquely undisciplined or unvirtuous or unattractive. Other people are struggling like you are.
What began with a few women in a queen's living room had become something much larger. Eventually, it turned into one of the most recognizable wellness companies in the world. We know it today as Weight Watchers.
Losing weight has never been so tasty.
By the time you get to the 80s, there are all of these branded products. There are TV commercials.
It's not what it looks like. I thought we were on a diet. We are. Jennifer, don't try to fool me.
And cookbooks and food and frozen dinners that have sometimes Jean's face on them, but that are endorsed by, celebrities.
This isn't a diet. This is freedom.
Weight Watchers is absolutely a household name. And so it really is this cultural touchstone, which is absolutely everywhere in the culture.
Looking back, the reason people were so willing to come out and diet together is complex. And many, including those involved with today's version of Weight Watchers, would probably call it problematic.
Weight Watchers, while providing a form of support, never really interrogated the underlying goal of getting thin as something women should be investing a lot of energy in.
We see it now, and the company has evolved.
It has really kind of responded to our changing attitudes towards weight loss. Just a few years ago, it was seen as sort of undesirable to admit you wanted to lose weight once again, and that was not body positive. And they actually changed their name to WW, taking out the Weight Watchers formally. But now they're back. They're Weight Watchers again, and they have a partnership with GLP-1 companies. So I think you can really see the way Neidich's vision, which was revolutionary for the 1960s, has in some ways remained very true to what it's always been.
It's always been about achieving weight loss goals, but it's been about something more fundamental, too.
What Neidich really understood and was a pioneer in understanding it is that having that group accountability, telling people that you're going to do something, having to show up and talk about your food choices, and yes, even weigh in, that was so new at that time. Struggling alone at home, making promises to yourself that nobody else knows about is just not a way to accomplish anything. And I think that that sounds very obvious, and maybe it is from a sort of just humanity or human psychology perspective. But I think that around the question of diet and women's bodies in the era that she came of age, it was not obvious at all.
Natalia Melman-Petrozella is a historian of American political culture and an expert on how our social values shape our personal habits. She's also the author of the book Fit Nation: The Gains and Pains of America's Exercise Obsession. You can learn more about her work in our show notes and at schwab.com/choiceology. Weight Watchers has evolved substantially since its founding. We now know far more about the science of why we weigh what we do, and that biology and genetics play an important role, making some of Weight Watchers' early diet instructions sound quite dated. But Jean Nidetch had a powerful insight that she leveraged to help people achieve their goals, something many behavioral scientists would later confirm. She understood that the hardest promises to break are the ones other people expect us to keep. My next guest has spent years studying exactly how the situations and people we count on to help us pursue our goals can influence our personal success. Angela Duckworth is my friend, colleague, and collaborator at the University of Pennsylvania, where she's a fellow professor. We co-direct the Behavior Change for Good initiative at Penn, and Angela is the best-selling author of Grit: The Power of Passion and Perseverance. More notably, she has a terrific new book out, which we'll talk about, called Situated: Find the People and Places that Bring Out Your Best. Hi, Angela. Thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Katy, it's always good to be together. I know we spend a lot of time together, but it's never gets old.
Aw, likewise. I'm particularly excited to be with you today because of this amazing book you've written, Situated, which shares so many important lessons about how we can accomplish more by changing our situation. One of my favorite chapters in the book talks about accountability. And I want to start by just asking if you could explain how you define accountability, because it's a commonly used word and some of its common uses don't really map onto the way we think about it as behavioral scientists.
I think when a lot of us think about our goals, our New Year's resolutions, I want to sleep more, I want to exercise more, I want to snack less. Like we think about it as ourselves. I think that's natural. Like, I am going to do this. I'm going to do better. But accountability is making a goal in a social context. And in particular, asking another person to keep you accountable. So you're not just achieving this goal for yourself, but you are in some sense achieving it for the two of you if you're reporting to one other person, even if that goal still is personal. So you could say to me, Katy, I really feel like I need to get to bed earlier. I commit to you, Angela, that I'm getting to bed by 10 p.m. So it does benefit Katy to do that. And Katy's the one who has to do the work. But now if I'm your accountability partner, you're doing it in some ways for both of us.
And I think we all know intuitively that it can be helpful to have someone holding us accountable, but I'm not sure most people are familiar with how much evidence there is that supports this. Could you talk a little bit about some of the research suggesting that accountability can be a valuable way to increase goal success?
What the research suggests from many, many studies that have been aggregated and analyzed is that goals are even better when they are public, not private. So rather than making a private New Year's resolution to get to bed at 10 p.m., by the way, I'm projecting, that is a resolution of mine. I do want to go to bed earlier. So rather than keeping that a private goal, I could share it with another person. And the research suggests that the very best way to share that goal is not, through Facebook, but through a one-on-one interaction, a face-to-face interaction where I look you in the eyes and I say, Katy, I commit to going to bed at 10 o'clock every night. And then to ask you to keep me accountable to that. So knowing that I'm going to have to report back to you, knowing that you're going to ask me about what my bedtime has been, say a week from now, 2 weeks from now, that amplifies the benefits of goal setting.
You mentioned that it's best when it's a one-on-one commitment. What do we know about who we should make these kinds of commitments to, and where can we see this approach working really well?
You know, I've been writing about the situation, and I became very obsessed, if you will, with a certain Catholic high school in Concord, California called De La Salle High School. And I became obsessed with them because they have the winningest football record in football history. And they had 151 consecutive wins over 12 years. And without exception, I think have been winning 6 times as many games as they lose. And it really is remarkable because California is not an easy state to have a winning football team in. There are many larger schools that give out athletic scholarships, schools that do special recruiting. And this is like pretty much like practically a walk-on team. And the secret, the coaches will tell you, is peer accountability. So what they do in this football team is that every week on a 3x5 index card, each player, from like the star, the quarterback, the captain, to, you know, like the guys who don't really get to see a lot of play time, but everybody writes down their goals for the week. And that is, again, what we've known for many years in research. Like you're making your vague intentions articulate, you're making a commitment. But what's key is that instead of everybody taking this 3x5 index card, folding it in half and putting it in their back pocket, they are handing it to another person on the team. So every boy on the team has to pair off and hand their card to someone else. They read their goals aloud to their commitment card partner. And by the way, they do it one by one. So it takes like a long time. It takes like at least like well over an hour for each player to read out what they intend to do. They commit to one other person, but they do it in front of all 52 other players and the coaches. And they sit down. There are no fines. There are no financial incentives. It's simply the power of peer accountability. And this practice began right before they started their winning streak. And what the coaches will tell you, including Coach Ladd, who's the now retired coach who started this, is that there is no higher power than peer accountability. It's even more powerful than making a commitment to your coach or your mentor. And what the magic is, I think, of this is that in some ways, you asked me like, well, who should we be reporting to? I think for the boys, you know, they see each other all week. So if somebody has a weightlifting goal or a conditioning goal that's, you know, otherwise observable, if they have a practice goal or a game day goal, your accountability partner sees everything. I do think exporting this to our own lives, you know, like you're not going to be in my bedroom at 10 o'clock at night, I hope, when I, know, pull out my Ann Patchett book.
We normally split off earlier than that.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time together, but we haven't quite gotten that far. So I do think that is one of the challenges of making this wonderful tip. Like, oh my gosh, I'm going to make a commitment card and I'm going to read it out loud to someone else. But at the De La Salle Spartans, the system for keeping tabs on your accountability partner is sort of built in. So I will say that we have to like do a little creative engineering, but I think the general logic is clear, and we will do for others what we will not do for ourselves.
I love the example of the Spartans. It's such a clear way to implement this. And one of the things I really like about it is that you're highlighting 2 things. One, these are peers who care about each other. They have a shared goal. And the other is also that they can see performance. So we know it's visible, not just that I could lie to you and tell you, hey, yeah, I did my weightlifting, because you're going to be in the gym with me and you're going to see if I did it. Angela, it makes me think of this study we used to teach together when we co-taught a seminar that was about how to drive voter turnout, where these researchers, Gerber, Green, and Larimer, sent out messages to Michigan voters in a primary and told them that they were tracking their voter history, which is a matter of public record, and giving them a list to show that they could do this of their turnout at recent elections. And then they randomized some people to also see the turnout of their neighbors. Some people only saw the turnout of their families, and other people didn't see anyone else's turnout. And they were told they'd get an update after the election on the same information. So in other words, what happened here is some people are just told you're being watched. Some people are told you and your family are being watched, and I'm going to keep you all in the loop about who turns out. And some are told you and your family and your neighbors are being watched, and I'm going to keep you all in the loop. And if I'm remembering correctly, I think there was something like an 8 percentage point boost in voter turnout from sharing this information about neighbors, and a 4 percentage point boost from sharing information about family, suggesting, first of all, this is wildly effective to make you feel accountable to these other people. But second, that it was more powerful to make you feel accountable to your neighbors than your immediate family. And I have always found that really interesting. I know we've talked about it a lot with our students. I'm curious if you have thoughts on why it is that that neighborhood unit is more potent than the family unit as an accountability tool in this particular case, and if there's any takeaways we can leave with from that insight.
I think when I tell Jason, my husband, that I'm going to go to bed at 10 p.m., and he, by the way, is a great accountability partner in some ways, because like he is in the bedroom with me, and he knows exactly when I go to sleep. And so you could say like, well, the more intimate the accountability partner, the better. The better they know you, the more time they spend with you. But then again, you have the finding that you just mentioned. And my guess is that what's wrong with Jason as accountability partner is he knows me so well that he's going to forgive me for, all the slips and like, oh yeah, well, of course, well, that night, I mean, come on, you had so much work to do or some other excuse. So I think there is something about the distance, the social distance from our neighbors. It's kind of the sweet spot of, well, you do care what they think, but they're not so close to you that they can give you a pass. I think that's primarily my intuition.
One thing that I think is interesting about accountability is that it can be really unpleasant to be held accountable for things, right? You can see, in fact, the example we talked about a moment ago with voter turnout, people hated getting these mailings saying, your neighbors are going to find out if you vote in this election or not. Like, they were furious. And, a lot of the places where we want to support goal pursuit are not as friendly as your classroom or a sports team, right? It might be a large employer that's trying to get people to follow through on goals related to work productivity, and it might feel manipulative. And I'm curious what you think leaders can do to ensure they use accountability in a way that inspires and is effective without creating anger or backlash.
Well, there is this term in psychology that I know you're very familiar with, reactance, like turn left. No, I'm going to turn right. Sit down. No, I'm going to stand up. I mean, there is this resistance that is reflexive for many of us. And I think what's really going on is that we all have a need for autonomy. I remember when my daughters were young, that my younger daughter, Lucy, would say to my older daughter, Amanda, you're not the boss of me. And I think that is true of human nature, that we don't want anyone to be the boss of us, even our boss in some ways. So how do you engineer a system of peer accountability without reactance? I don't have a random assignment study, but I do have the example of the De La Salle Spartans. One of the reasons I think that the symmetry was very important to Coach Ladd is that he said that when you are in the system and somebody is keeping you accountable and you are keeping them accountable, and you do it week after week after week and season after season, which means year after year, you develop a sense of appreciation for how hard it is to be on the receiving end and on the giving end of feedback. Because one thing that I, maybe didn't emphasize enough is that when the next week rolls around and your commitment card partner stands up, they will report on what you did and what you didn't do. And when I sat there listening to these 15-year-old boys say with complete unvarnished candor, goal number 1, not achieved. Goal number 2, achieved. Goal number 3, not achieved. Goal number 4, not achieved. I was trying to keep tabs in my head of, the success rate. And I think it was like, I'm wildly guessing, but maybe 50% of goals had been achieved, meaning there was a lot of failure feedback. And when Coach Ladd said the symmetry is very important, it's because when you're in the system as a giver and a receiver, when you're being held accountable, but you're also holding someone else accountable, you can appreciate how hard it is to give somebody that kind of accountability feedback, how hard it is for everyone to receive it. And I think that built-in empathy works against, you're not the boss of me. Like, this is coming as a directive. And as a leader, then that means that you have to do what Coach Ladd did, which is to create a system where there's enough buy-in that people feel like, okay, like we're doing this, we're all getting better, but it doesn't feel hierarchical. It doesn't feel like a mandate. And of course, there's a lot of culture building that goes into it. But I have to say, I really respect leaders. Like, they have to do so much, right? So they have to like pick up little tips like the commitment card, but somehow integrate it into a culture where, because there's enough trust, because there's enough communication, like you can try something like this and not have it backfire.
That's a really great message, Angela, that the culture matters and that we can't expect accountability to work in a vacuum. It has to be in a culture of trust. Getting back to the book Situated, your core argument is really that we can make ourselves far more successful by strategically adjusting our situation to make goal achievement easier. And one way of doing that, right, is by finding people we trust who will hold us accountable for sticking to our commitments. But you also note that we tend to neglect the power of the situation, including this kind of peer accountability that we've been talking about. So I wanted to ask you why it is that you think we're so resistant to admitting that we need to change our situation. We need this kind of outside help.
We live in a culture that says that what can be controlled is on the inside. And since what cannot be controlled is the outside, therefore we should not talk about what is the outside. We should not talk about, whether this teacher is good, whether this field is good, whether the hospital rules are good. It is what we tell our children too. Like, don't complain about the team and about the unfairness of your teacher's rules. And, don't complain about the situation. You should control what you can control. And what you can control is yourself, right? I think that is incomplete and possibly even dangerous advice in the following way. I also don't want to say it's without merit, right? I'm sure I said a version of this to my own daughters, but I do think that when people point to the situation and say, this is not a great situation, I am in a losing situation, it's working against me, it's my enemy, not my ally, we should not say, well, stop talking about that. That's cowardly. You're a slacker. I think the reason why we say that is because we do want people to take agency and control over what they can change. But it's an incomplete prescription, because why can't they change the situation? Like, I feel like I've come to that realization later than I should have, because I was trying to focus on the inside things, my mindset and, my attitude, to the exclusion of thinking about how I could also change my situation.
I want to ask you for what parting advice you have for our listeners about how they can make use of the insights you've shared today about accountability. What should they do differently in their lives to use accountability to their advantage?
I think that if you make a to-do list, and it could be big or small. I mean, it could be things that you're trying to get done this week, or it could be like a New Year's resolution. Those tend to be more ambitious. You could not only write down what you're trying to do differently, but you could write down who is going to keep you accountable to each of those goals. And I will say that, for many of us, the following analogy will ring true. How many people will really make a nice dinner for just themselves versus like, oh, if it's just me, I'm going to pour a bowl of cereal, right? Like, because, it's just not worth the effort and energy if it's just for you. I think so many things are like that. We will do for others what we will not do for ourselves. And if we can use that, then all to the better. And if you ask someone like, do you want to be my accountability partner and I will be yours? Then it's symmetric the way Bob Ladouceur at the De La Salle Spartans would want it to be. And, everyone wins. And I don't think you're expecting that every week you're going to say like, yes, achieved, achieved, achieved. It could be like achieved, not achieved, like working on it. But I really do believe that it is the way we should go. And as you know, Katy, we're spending more time alone in society. People are eating alone. They are exercising alone, entertaining themselves alone. I think it's high time we get together and, changing goal setting from a private activity to a communal social activity is one way to do that.
It's a fantastic place to end. I so appreciate you taking the time to do this interview, Angela, and tell us about your amazing book and about the power of accountability. And also, thank you for being an amazing accountability partner to me. I really appreciate it.
You're my accountability partner. As you know, you're my academic BFF. So I'm very happy to be in this conversation, and I will see you soon.
I will see you soon. Thank you, Angela. Angela Duckworth is the Rosa Lee and Egbert Chang Professor at the University of Pennsylvania, where her office is 2 doors down from mine. She and I also co-founded and co-direct the Behavior Change for Good initiative. And Angela is the author of the mega bestseller Grit, The Power of Passion and Perseverance. She also has a fabulous brand new book out September 1st called Situated. Find the people and places that bring out your best. To learn more about how the phenomena we explore on Choiceology can impact your portfolio and finances, check out our sister podcast, Financial Decoder. You can find it at schwab.com/financial decoder or in your favorite podcast app. What I hope you'll remember from this episode is that there's real power in making yourself accountable to your teammates, your friends, and your neighbors. When you make your goals and progress visible to other people, you gain an added motive to succeed and much-needed support when you stumble. Without that insight, Weight Watchers might never have become a household name, and the world might not have the Lord of the Rings. But the best part about this idea is that you can use it to accomplish more right away. I'll bet you can find a colleague, teammate, friend, or even a stranger online who'd be glad to pair up so you can both accomplish more together. That wraps this episode of Choiceology, an original podcast from Charles Schwab. If you're ready to learn more about goal setting, you can find plenty of actionable strategies in Angela Duckworth's terrific new book, Situated. Or for broader lessons about the psychology behind our decisions, you can join a community of fellow Choiceology enthusiasts over at my Milkman Delivers newsletter on Substack. And if you learned something today about the power of accountability, we'd be so grateful if you could share by leaving the show a rating on Spotify or a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps other listeners find the show. And while you're there, hit follow so you never miss an upcoming episode. I'm Dr. Katy Milkman. Talk to you soon.